that interview.
We are in such a corroded media environment, and especially on the right. They're just eating up this slop on the internet. How do
Let me know if it's a little too low on the volume. I had to play around with all this stuff, so.
we break through? How do we break through? And having a simple message doesn't mean we're stupid. In fact, it means we're better at politics. And I think Democrats have to stop resting on our laurels and thinking that just because our policies are better than the Republicans, that's true. It doesn't mean it's self-evident to voters, and it doesn't mean they're dumb because they don't get it. It's also because people want a clear, coherent vision and a way to differentiate yourself from the other side.
Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Tommy Vitor. Both John and Dan are away this week. Happy Liberation Day to them. So we thought we'd take the opportunity to mix things up a little bit.
Happy Liberation
and what has turned
Day.
into a wild news week thanks to President Trump's announcement about tariffs and subsequent stock market crash. So joining me today as my co-host is the excellent Emma Vigeland. She's the co-host of the Majority Report with Sam Seder and one of the smartest political analysts out there. Emma, great to see you. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Tommy, for the kind words. I really appreciate you having me on today.
I'm very excited to have you on. We are going to talk about the politics of Trump's tariffs, the Democratic Party's big win in Wisconsin, some signs of hope about how Democrats are fighting back, and how to fix some of these lingering divisions between the moderate and more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. Do you think we can heal the wounds from 2016 today? Can we finally do it?
I mean, never say never, but we're gonna, I think, move that ball along.
We're gonna move the needle. I mean, jokes aside, I am really excited to talk to you about this because I know you come from more of the DSA, Bernie wing of the party, but you are also pragmatic and constructive and smart and thoughtful. So I just appreciate that about you. And I think,
wow, that's kind of a little bit of a low-key jab there, right?
it's a good balance
I'm missing that?
of the show and a good
Or am
conversation.
I looking too deep into
Should
that?
have, and a timely one. So you guys are also going to hear my conversation with a longtime economics writer named James Surowiecki about the details of Trump's tariffs
Yeah,
and
okay.
why the
Yeah.
White House's tariff math just made no sense. Then you're going to hear my interview with Susan Rice. We recorded that on Wednesday. She's the former National Security Advisor, ambassador to the UN, White House Domestic Policy Council chair. We talk about Signalgate, Trump appeasing Russia.
Where's Jeff? He usually shows up around right around now, 6, 7 o'clock.
RFK's assault on our public health and a lot more. And then finally, at the end of the show, you're going to hear just
He'll be
a
here
brief
soon,
interview
Ritesh.
of a conversation I had with my friend Ashley Parker. She's a staff writer at The Atlantic, and Ashley wrote this beautiful, funny, tearjerker of an essay about miscarriage and pregnancy loss, which longtime listeners of the show might know is something that unfortunately my wife Hannah and I have also experienced. So that full conversation is available on the Pod Save America YouTube. I hope you'll give it a listen, but you can hear an excerpt of it at the end of this episode. So like I said, packed show, but a great one. So let's start with the tariffs. On Wednesday, President Trump made an appearance in the Rose Garden. He announced his long-awaited tariffs on basically every country he says treats America poorly on trade. The specifics here were a big mystery until the moment he announced them with his big stupid charts, and they were far worse than expected. Trump announced a baseline 10% tariff on all U.S. imports. Far steeper tariffs on countries Trump declared were the worst offenders,
Yeah, the same thought implies that the wing is not normally smart or reasonable.
including some
Yeah.
of our closest allies like the
Emma's
European
one of the
Union,
good ones.
Japan, South Korea, and others. China got hit with a 54% tariff. They're vowing retaliation. And to make matters worse and more confusing, Trump's 25% tariffs on foreign-made cars also went into effect on Thursday. So in total, about 90 countries will be affected, including a number of uninhabited islands. So we're going to stick it to those fucking penguins. So we're recording this on Thursday afternoon Pacific time. Markets have closed for the day. The S&P dropped nearly 5%. Trump got asked about the stock market dip at the White House today next to the roaring helicopter engines, as always.
As
and
always.
responded with
What? It's always just in case, so he needs to be like, I gotta go, I can't hear you.
spin. Let's listen.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country, and we've never seen anything like it.
What pristine audio. Emma, Trump has clearly made inroads with blue-collar voters in the last couple of elections, especially in communities that were hit hard by NAFTA or other free trade agreements. He believes that tariffs are how he can convince those communities that he cares about them and that he's fighting for them. How do you think Democrats should respond to that?
I think that he's making it extremely easy, even though the facts are that people are going to be really harmed if these actually go into effect. You can just basically talk about tariffs as a tax on the poorest Americans. When you look at a sales tax, right? The sales tax is essentially a flat tax on all goods, and it is called a regressive tax because the less money you have, the more you're disproportionately impacted by a sales tax. If you're a millionaire, a sales tax on a banana or on some groceries isn't going to affect you as much as somebody in the middle income bracket or in the lower income bracket. And tariffs essentially function as a compounding sales tax because they raise the cost of basic goods, and really.
No, but they didn't use the word tax, so it's not a tax. I swear to God, that's essentially the crux of the arguments I've been having today.
Like, let's just zoom out for a second and say, okay, Donald Trump wanted to onshore manufacturing, and he wanted to further build up our domestic manufacturing capacity here in the United States. We would need billions and billions of dollars of investment. We would need it to happen over a multi-year period to even create the factories and systems and supply lines that would be needed so that we could onshore this manufacturing and produce the goods here that are now going to be hit by these tariffs. But he's doing it in reverse, and I don't even think that would work.
Brad, you're just going to leave Mitesh hanging like that? He's saying what's up to you.
He's now imposing the tariffs when we don't have the capacity to produce a lot of these goods that are going to be hit with the tariffs and these price increases. And so Americans have no choice.
If it was a tax, it'd be a taxif.
But
all right, zing. I should just use that against somebody, see how that actually
pay
flies.
more and more and have their
Knowing
wallets
it's just
here. And it's not entirely
bad
clear
joke.
what he thinks he's going to gain from this, except I think he genuinely has a complete misunderstanding of trade policy.
Yeah.
He thinks he can shake down other countries this way. And frankly,
I mean, the fact that Ben Shapiro is like shock Pikachu over this shit, where he's just like, I honest to God thought he knew what a trade deficit was, but you know that they're wrestling with the idea like, oh God, he really is that stupid. And it took him this, like, for Ben Shapiro to take this long is kind of funny.
It seems like ever
what?
since January 6th, he's been holed up in Mar-a-Lago with very little connection to the outside world and to even the threadbare pieces of liberal society that he was connected to via Ivanka or whatever in 2016. He's in OANNville and doesn't know left from right. And so my guess is somebody got into his ear, maybe somebody who read that Karl Rove book about William McKinley, who he's now obsessed with, and said that this is going to be the thing that allows us to raise revenue without having to go through the
I said hi with an emoji. So I'm doing your work, digging through the dirt, so I'm not at the top of
process
okay.
of developing tax
I felt like he was just like
policy via the legislature. It allows Trump to act as a king, and I do think the other side of this is that for the industries that are affected by these tariffs, now Trump feels like they're going to have to come to me, and they're going to have to give me goodies like he got from various news organizations with his frivolous lawsuits. It's open corruption and also an open war, frankly, if these go into effect and are more permanent, and there still is potential to back off of it, hopefully. It's really going to harm the lowest income people in our society.
Yeah, I mean, I just got McKinley so hot right now. I mean, I wish he wasn't, but there's just a lot of McKinley emulation happening in the Republican Party. You're right, though. I was just watching a speech by Rand Paul, who was like, hey, this is a massive tax increase, and you're trying to do it through this bizarre tariff authority that has never been used before, and you're going around Congress. Like, none of this is acceptable or by the book or how it's supposed to go. And to your point about the timeline of revving up American manufacturing, you're hearing some people say, well, you know, there's auto plants in the Midwest that are operating at 60% capacity, and those could go up to 80 or 90 or 100. You're hearing that even from Sean Fain from the UAW. But I was talking to an expert on Monday who was like, I'm not so sure that that capacity is going to be filled by human beings as opposed to robots.
Yeah.
And also like retooling and revving back up these factories, even if they exist already, can take a really long time. So I'm with you. It feels.
I mean, it's taken almost 4 years to get the one over in Belvedere, Illinois, up and running again.
Like, it's pie in the sky to me.
I mean, if we wanted to reindustrialize, again, tariffs can be used in a targeted way. Say if it were just purely for the auto industry and we were trying to develop that capacity, I could even understand that, right? But that's not what he's doing. These are broad-based tariffs that he's calling reciprocal, but are not. And the other thing that is just so terrifying is that all of this talk about short-term pain in the stock market, what happens when the Republicans gut Medicaid, as they're promising to do with their budget in the fall? 72 million people are on Medicaid. That rely on it for their health care. Half of the folks on
Yuck. This is terrifying.
Medicaid are well below the poverty line. These
Good one, Anna.
are the people that would be hurt the hardest with this compounding sales tax, with this regressive tariff that would function as a tax. And so they would be immiserated if the Republicans get their way. And we're seeing, I know Ted Cruz as of right now is coming out a little bit against the tariffs. And as you mentioned, Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul, they dipped their toe into criticizing Donald Trump because, by the way, Kentucky bourbon, Kentucky, I think, produces over 90% of the world's bourbon. And these tariffs on Canada, those guys are saying, hey, screw you. We're not going to buy bourbon from you anymore if you're talking about making us the 51st state. So this affects folks in Republican states. And like the 2008 financial crash, the people that are closest to retirement, whose 401ks do not have the time to replenish, don't have the ability to wait out this short-term pain. Their entire retirement could be cut in half right now because Donald Trump and his buddies are playing with the stock market, basically.
I was just watching Fox News, and there was a host named Will Kane who was doing a segment who was like, look, today the markets are down, the S&P is down, the NASDAQ, the Dow, but what do we mean by down? And then he threw up a zoomed out chart of the market that went back like 1 year or 5 years. And boy, you know the cope is strong when these guys are doing a 5-year chart of the S&P 500 and be like, we're doing like a what's the definition of is kind of conversation, a la Bill Clinton in the 90s. It didn't feel like they're on there.
Well, they're also using charts that like the last one that they were using was from 2008, and it was essentially like showing how the Obama administration was responsible for taking us out of that recession, thus giving the Democrats some credit at the same time. Right?
But on the Democratic Party,
or are they then going and revising history and going, but it was all in anticipation, like going all the way back to 2009 when, pretty much Obama got elected. That was all in anticipation for 2016 when Trump was going to win.
Piece of this. Do you think it's enough to make the argument that you're making, which I find very compelling, by the way, because it's true, against
That's the logic, I swear to God, that they're trying to like sell us on right now.
tariffs, that there are regressive
Remember when Trump wanted to make Gaza a resort? Yeah, I remember.
backdoor way?
Oh God, we're gonna have to play the. You remember what Trump said? Just what? Not even a month
to
ago.
raise taxes on people.
Oh my
Or
God.
does that need to be married up with some
That's
sort of
a messed
positive
up
agenda,
timeline.
even if we have no power at the federal level for 4 years?
I think you've hit on it. It absolutely does need to be paired with, a positive agenda. And talking about the oligarchy has proved to be immensely fruitful for the Democrats. Because you also have a mascot for yourself right there in Elon Musk, who nobody likes. The more they see of him, the more repulsive he is. And frankly, I mean, it's quite clear why. He's just not somebody that has natural charisma and is obviously saying things like Social Security is the biggest Ponzi scheme of all time. When
He's
we know
lacking that
Social
riz,
Security
as
is one
the
of the most
kids say.
successful programs in the history of our country, if not the most successful program. It keeps 2/3 of our seniors out of poverty. It is self-funding. You fund it and Medicare via the payroll tax, and it's set aside in the budget so people don't have to worry about it. It's not a Ponzi scheme. It is a retirement fund that all Americans pay into. So I think talking about Social Security, talking about our social programs, and of course a positive vision of we do need Medicare for all. We do single payer. We need some sort of health care plan that is not just improving the Affordable Care Act. And I think Tim Walz has been really good about this. But tapping into the pain that Americans are feeling, where, traditional economic indicators don't necessarily pick up on what folks had been experiencing in the run-up to the 2024 election. Because, obviously I was hoping Kamala Harris was going to win, but the way that the campaign was run and saying that, the economy is good, we just have to improve on it, it didn't prove to be the most salient argument in this time, because there are things that traditional economic metrics aren't picking up on, like the fact that rent has never been higher. I'm
also picking up on the fact that he hasn't sounded like great at all. He literally sounds like he's just like so low energy, like he's losing energy.
The fact that
it doesn't seem healthy.
Corporations took advantage of inflation and artificially kept their prices higher in the wake of COVID and took home record returns. And even though Lena Khan was doing her best, it's quite difficult to get these corporations in line when they have somebody who's running on the presidential ticket who says, hey, if you elect me, she'll go away. Don't even worry about it. We'll make sure that you get to keep doing what you want to do in terms of extracting profits from the rest of Americans. And frankly, it's almost as if Donald Trump learned from corporations during COVID, where basically you can take advantage of naturally occurring inflation or persistent inflation in order to cement those prices, and then he doesn't have to address it via Congress, but he can essentially elevate tariffs, impose them on goods, and say, like, what can you do? This is naturally what has to happen. And then he thinks he can bend the American people to his will.
Yeah, it's worth noting. I mean, on Thursday, Senator Chuck Grassley, who's a senior Republican, and Maria Cantwell, who's a very senior Democrat, introduced a bill that would require approval from Congress for all tariffs within 60 days. Congress also passed a more limited measure regarding tariffs on Canada. Now, pretty big open question of whether the House of Representatives would ever call up a bill like this, even if it passed the Senate. I'm consider me skeptical. But the other piece of this that I just wanted to hit on quickly is what's so kind of bizarre about this tariff announcement is Trump ran on the threat from China. But instead of focusing on China with his tariffs, we are taking this broad-based approach. We're tariffing all of our closest allies. And then earlier this week, we're reading reports that countries like Japan, South Korea, were meeting with China trilaterally for the first time in 5 years to discuss how to coordinate their response to U.S. tariffs. That was according to Chinese state media. So if the rise of China is like the big agreed upon bipartisan risk to the United States over the next century, this seems like the dumbest possible way to tackle it.
Absolutely. Oof. I mean, we're now getting reporting about how much further along both China is on AI. We heard that a few months ago with DeepSeek and how much cheaper it is, but also their electric vehicles. There is some early reporting that shows that BYD, the EV kind of behemoth in China, has developed a battery that can charge in the same amount of time that it takes to fill up a petrol tank or your gas tank at the gas pump, or at the very least they're close. And so when you think about these tariffs, why wouldn't Canada look to China and say, hey, if the United States is going to treat us this way, we should start buying from China. We should start buying Chinese vehicles. Mexico, the same thing. And it's even more common sense for our allies across the Atlantic and elsewhere. Or former allies, I should say. It's nonsensical. It really is. And, like inflation, I was kind of alluding to this earlier, these tariffs don't prevent domestic manufacturers from raising prices.
They'll encourage it, yeah.
Right. It encourages it because, frankly, they can just blame the tariffs.
Right.
Like corporations did with inflation, really, in 2022, 2023. And in part, I think, because they were pissed that the Biden administration was doing some more enforcement with Lena Khan and with Jonathan Cantor and that part of the administration domestically that I was very much a fan of. And so, yeah, I really do think he's opening the door for more price gouging. And instead of inflation this time, U.S. Companies can just blame tariffs and say, what else can we do?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if the tariffs are successful, prices will go up. No matter what, prices are going to go up. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And then you're going to hear my conversation with James Surowiecki about the substance of Trump's tariffs announcement and why basically every economist seems to think that the way these tariffs were calculated was just complete nonsense. We'll also talk a bit about the stock market reaction. James has written about economics for outlets like Fast Company, The Atlantic, The New Yorker, and is the author of the book, The Wisdom of Crowds. So stick around for that. And then after the interview with James, Emma and I are going to talk about how a fringe right-wing conspiracy theorist is making personnel changes on Trump's national security team, and then the Democrats' big win in Wisconsin, the state of the party, and progressive media. Pod Save America is brought to you by Built. If you're
Oh, wow. They have 5 minutes of... No, what? Okay, no, 2. It's 2 minutes, but still.
Into healthy adults.
James Surowiecki, welcome to Pod Save America.
Thanks for having me on.
So let's just start with the basics. What did President Trump announce yesterday?
So what he announced was that the United States will be imposing tariffs on, I would say, almost every country in the world. It's a little unclear. There's some countries that weren't on the list. And we know that Canada and Mexico were exempted because they already...
Much for doing the show. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, we are back. Still have Emma Vigeland, co-host of The Majority Report with Sam Cedar, here with me. Emma, so apparently Trump found time on Liberation Day to meet with a far-right conspiracy theorist named Laura Loomer. Now, if listeners have never heard of Laura Loomer, consider yourself lucky. In the past, she has said that the 9/11 attacks were an inside job, that the White House would, quote, smell like curry if Kamala Harris were elected, and she once handcuffed herself to the front door of Twitter's office building while wearing a yellow Star of David like the ones that European Jews were forced to wear during the Holocaust because Twitter had banned her from the platform. Despite all of that, Trump met with Loomer for 30 minutes on Wednesday to hear her case for why he should fire members of his national security team, and then, according to the New York Times, fired 6 NSC officials, including the senior director for intelligence, international organizations, and legislative affairs. Emma, how does this person get into the White House in the first place, let alone make personnel decisions? Like, what do you think this tells us about decision-making in there?
I think Donald Trump's circle is as small as it could possibly be. I mean, Laura Loomer was laughed out of the room, and should be in any room. I mean, she's an absolute nut job. But she ran for Congress down in Florida and was so crazy that even the Republicans down in there didn't vote her out of the primary. And then all of a sudden she's hanging out with Donald
What the hell that was?
Trump and appearing on his plane. I really, as bad as Trump 1 was, you got to think about who are the people that we're rooting for in terms of voices of reason here in Trump 2.0. In the first administration, okay, you have Rex Tillerson, ExxonMobil executive, not a good person, but somebody who's at least a functional human being. Bryce Priebus, I think he might have resigned within the first 100 days because of how bad it was, but there was an effort to get, like, establishment Republicans who are at least adults and not little babies and toddlers in the room. Basically, over the past few months, who have been advocating for brakes on the car? It's been people from the outside, like, I mean, honestly, Steve Bannon, who was a white nationalist, trying to say maybe you shouldn't install Elon Musk illegally in the Treasury and let his neo-Nazi Groyper 19-year-olds steal the data that of every American, their social security number, their bank information, their like all of that. Maybe you shouldn't do that. And Bannon justifies it on, of course, xenophobic and nationalistic grounds, but that's all we have right now. And then you have Laura Loomer, one of the craziest people I could think of off the top of my head.
Truly.
If you were to gun to my head, I would say, like, in politics, she's in the top 5.
It's amazing that we have a Twitter troll now in charge of running the national security apparatus. We're so fucked.
Potentially.
Yeah.
She's the voice of reason right now saying, hey, maybe some heads have to roll after there was this massive, embarrassing display where Mike Waltz added the editor of the Atlantic to a Signal group chat, basically displaying that it seems like the Trump administration is illicitly doing, enacting their communications and probably across a variety of different agencies on a commercially available encrypting app, seemingly to avoid the scrutiny of the Presidential Records Act, which Trump was so angry about because some of that was used in the Mueller probe when his transition team went through the official channels after he won in 2016. So there's so much illegality here, and because Trump also has scared so many of the other Republicans, and frankly vetted his administration to make sure that there was nobody who isn't in the cult and people aren't leaking. We don't know how bad it is in the same way that we knew in 2016, because some of those adults in the room were talking to, the Washington Post or the New York Times or whatever.
Yeah, they all were hanging out with Maggie Haberman on After Hours. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like, Laura Loomer is genuinely crazy, but she also called bullshit when Pam Bondi invited a bunch of influencers to the White House and then handed them literal, like, binders that you would take to second grade.
Broken clock,
that
dude.
said Epstein files that had
Right.
seemingly nothing in them. She was like, what are we doing here? This is a joke. You're kind of making light of a horrific case of abusing young women.
Oh my God. That is like the most milquetoast way I've heard that one put. And honestly, like, I'm not sure if his NPR delivery really helped with it, but what the...
Yeah,
right.
You're right. I mean, in this case, I mean, there was a report in Politico that Mike Waltz had set up like 20 Signal channels about various issues that should never be discussed on Signal. Like, the entire NSC process has apparently been made up on Signal, so that's nuts. But yeah, I mean, having Laura Loomer in the White House, it did make me think about all the stories we were reading just a few weeks ago about how Susie Wiles, the new chief of staff, was running a tighter ship and like keeping all the fringy people at bay. It doesn't seem like that's the case anymore. And just like to nerd out for 1 second, I mean, some of these jobs we're talking about, like the senior director for intelligence, means you're the person on the national security staff that is overseeing all the most sensitive covert action programs, compartmented intelligence collection, the intelligence budget, like the how we collect stuff, the sources and methods stuff, the most sensitive shit that the intelligence community does. And like, when I was in the Obama administration, it is unimaginable to me that anyone outside of the NSC staff would know who had that job, let alone have an opinion about who should work there, let alone allowing some crazy lady to the Oval Office to lobby. And so I don't know, like, just reading this made my head spin with the absurdity of it all, though I guess I shouldn't be surprised, because like Laura Loomer, who said 9/11 was an inside job, was on the Trump plane when he went to the 9/11 memorial a few months ago.
And
Again, why you shouldn't even give her the time of day, just even saying like, well, she said something kind of smart.
yet the Trump administration is now deporting student activists protesting against the genocide in Gaza under the guise of saying that it is combating anti-Semitism. This is the guy that said that there were good sides, or good people on both sides in Charlottesville. I still remember that.
Oh, but then you got but he condemns them right afterwards. Although, honestly, at least say, like, frame it the way that the right wing does, so at least they can't do that shit anymore. Just be like, even if you have to put quotations.
Elon Musk is the guy that was endorsing the Great Replacement Theory via tweet until the ADL had to tell him, maybe you shouldn't say that, and was sig heiling at the inauguration and was endorsing the far-right German party that said we had to move past remembering what we did here in Germany. I mean, it is unbelievable the level of gaslighting that this administration engages in, because they really don't care about what facts they're presenting. Steve Bannon, again, to bring him up, back in the day said we just have to flood the zone. And I do feel like the administration here has almost perfected that to a degree, because there is so much insanity that it's difficult to sink your teeth into anything.
No, they've been very effective in it.
Or get a hook. And that's why I think Signalgate freaked them out.
Yeah.
It's because it was the first time they were on their heels
Because
for quite a while.
that's kind of funny, because they were like, oh shit, this is an actual like scandal. You guys really fucked up. Like, that they were like, Pete Hegseth, he may still be in like his position, but every time he walks into a room, everybody just goes.
And so I think hitting them on that, their incompetence, as they say, it's actually DEI or whatever, and that we're hiring based on merit. That's why we hired the Fox and Friends host, from the Weekend host, who has no real experience, to be our Secretary of Defense. Hitting them on their incompetence just as a political matter, and the oligarchy stuff, having these billionaires, not just Musk, Bessent, Howard Lutnick, whose firm, Cantor Fitzgerald, he handed over to his two sons who are in their 20s. they have major holdings in cryptocurrency and in commercial space. That's why he's on board with this Musk agenda. They're all getting rich. I do think that that's a really easy way to attack them. And it's not dissimilar from how they were attacked the first time around, but I do think it's more salient in the public's mind. And if the Democrats are smarter, and I think they're starting to kind of understand the virtue in what a lot of us who are supportive of Bernie Sanders, and myself, I also was a fan of Elizabeth Warren's politics, saw in them, is hitting this kind of underpinning of economic pain that a lot of Americans are facing. There's no reason that the Democrats should be losing working class votes to Donald Trump, given exactly what we're seeing with tariffs and the compounding tax on the poor that he's going to implement if he's allowed to.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, let's talk about America's least favorite oligarch. So that takes us to Wisconsin. So some good news for everybody. I mean, folks probably know by now that in Wisconsin, Judge Susan Crawford beat Brad Schimmel in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race by about 10 points. It was a shellacking, dealing a very satisfying and I think critical slapdown to Elon Musk, who spent, I read, like $26 million on this race. Maybe it was more. And for all intents and purposes, put himself on the ballot when he flew there, stood on stage, put that stupid fucking cheese head hat on his stupid head, and just made
this guy's got just
the whole thing about him.
Real party personality, this guy.
Him. And so, Emma, I wondered, you sort of alluded to this. Do you think that this victory is a reflection of the fact that Democrats now do better in off years and in special elections, or do you think there's something else happening here with kind of like the Elon oligarchy piece?
I do think it can be both, right? Democrats always overperform in special elections. The voter base has evolved over the time that I've honestly been paying attention to politics, where Democrats have kind of cornered the market in many ways on high propensity voters. A lot of folks that vote for Donald Trump, it's why Democrats overperformed in 2022.
Cheesehead is fitting for Elon.
And why I was wrong in assessing that Kamala Harris would win this last election cycle is because I thought that abortion would be enough to carry the day. I forgot this country really hates women. Andrew Tate's back in the country for some reason. And, we're appointing people who've been credibly accused of sexual assault to the highest positions in Trump's government, Trump himself, etc. But I digress. They do overperform in special elections, but it's how you overperform, I think, that matters. And with this focus on billionaires and the hoarding of the money and the ransacking of our federal government for their own ends, and the fact that Musk buying this race was so at the forefront. I mean, this is the most expensive judiciary race in history because Elon Musk said
$81 million. Crazy.
Insanity. And also, he said that this was going to be the determining factor in whether or not Western civilization survives.
Existential.
Wow. I mean, gotta say, I don't know, Tommy, but I feel like I'm looking around and I'm still in the West.
We're still here.
I'm in a high-rise or a taller building now in downtown Brooklyn. Nothing's fallen yet. But I think people are sick of the fact that that billionaires have this outsized influence in our politics, and we should be harnessing that energy in the way that Wisconsin did it. Also, you have to give credit to Ben Wickler, who has been really phenomenal up there in terms of organizing the Democratic Party and taking back what looked like a horrible situation, as you know, in the early Obama years.
Yeah, it was a really, really bad situation. Ben's done an incredible job. But I agree with you. It is a both. There's a lot of reporting out there that Wisconsin Republicans basically hit their turnout goals they wanted to hit. They wanted something like 230,000 more votes than they got in Dan Kelly's race, who was the Supreme Court candidate in 2023. But Democrats just turned out even more people. It turned out an additional 265,000 votes. And so there was some special energy there. But all of it, I think, does help explain why Republicans pulled Elise Stefanik's nomination to be the U.S. ambassador to the UN, because they are absolutely right to be worried that they would lose a special election right now to replace her, or really any special election.
Oh, she bought a new wardrobe. She got all excited. She was going to be in fancy New York City, and turns out she's got to go back and be a representative.
So good. It makes me so happy.
I'm sorry, but we've got to enjoy that Schadenfreude. It's the only thing that we have going on.
That's all we got.
Is kind of
That's all we
nice.
got. Well, let's talk about the Democratic Party, because ever since November, the Democratic Party, we've been engaged in some recriminations, some infighting, yes, but also I think a pretty good faith bit of soul searching about who we are and how to run going forward. And more recently, the debate has been less about policy or ideological lines and more about how hard to fight. So I assume, Emma, you're on team fight and team fight very hard.
Of course.
If so,
No, we're on team just sit on our hands and do nothing.
like, what are you seeing out there that feels smart tactically, or I don't know, just
Dude, do these guys really not see how they play into like right-wing narratives about like the weakness part of things? And just, I hate to say it, like this guy is kind of like the soy boy that they talk about.
genuinely inspiring you?
You know, here's as we talk about tariffs, this is a good way to just
Am I wrong? I mean,
say Chuck Schumer
I'll admit if I am.
giving away all of our
I'm
leverage
just getting major soy boy vibes.
is a huge reason why we're in this situation with tariffs, because the continuing resolution that was not a continuing resolution, it was a dirty CR in the dirtiest sense, it basically removed Congress's ability to review these tariffs. And so now you have this bipartisan bill with Grassley and I think Cantwell that is supposed to say, like, hey, can we reassert our authority over tariffs because Donald Trump just did a really bad thing? Well, look, the Democratic leader in the Senate just gave that leverage away. And I think, obviously, in my view, Schumer's time, he's on borrowed time as leader of the Democrats in the Senate. I don't see how the Democrats can continue to
Not
have
even
him
just
as
the leader of the Senate. He might not even have his position in the Senate.
Especially,
I'm telling you, if AOC is getting double digits in just like primaries, come
after
on.
the midterms in
Or primary interest, I should say.
2026. But yeah, there are some bright spots. I think that it was encouraging to see the House all stand together on that continuing resolution vote.
Mm-hmm.
It is encouraging to see some members of the party speak about billionaires, speak about the oligarchy. It's encouraging to hear. I heard Tim Walz on Molly Jong Fast show talk about how next election cycle people are going to be expecting universal health care as a part of these proposals. Going bold again.
Yes, especially like at state, like they're going to be looking for more state programs. I do know that like our governor is talking about already like bringing in and brainstorming this stuff because he knows that this is coming.
Is really important. And you know, I try not to.
After what happened in California, in response to what happened, with Luigi, well, allegedly, but the death of that CEO, they actually did something in response to that where they recognized, they're like, oh, these were super predatory practices, so they put a stop to those.
Pigeonhole my.
So. Well, don't forget that something did actually come out. Anytime somebody tries to be like, nothing was accomplished, it's like, actually.
Politics, right? Because, like, I'm a DSA member, right? And I'm someone who obviously believes strongly in something like Palestinian liberation. But I can also encourage my listeners to vote for Kamala Harris because that's the best option within our set of circumstances.
Right.
And I can appreciate Bernie Sanders' outside politics and how incredible it is to get people involved, but Elizabeth Warren's inside politics and influencing Biden to appoint Lena Khan, as I keep singing her praises throughout our conversation. But there is more consistency here, I think, than there was in the wake of 2016, where there was a lot of anger within the party. And I think there still is that. But there's also just a universal desire to fight, and it crosses ideological lines. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her ability to honestly meld Bernie Sanders' outside movement with the inside game of Elizabeth Warren is one of the most impressive things that I've seen in politics in quite some time. She's getting centrist Democratic lawmakers to say, I will write a check if you primary Chuck Schumer. And that is incredible, given the fact that she came into politics as a Democratic socialist and a rabble-rouser who was going into Nancy Pelosi's office and helping the Sunrise Movement stage protests. But I think that with this kind of insurgent movement of younger progressives in the House, there is a lot of anger, I think, at some of the folks in the Senate who are institutionalists. But I get the most hope from folks in the House, Democrats in the House, and also our governors who, whether it's Pritzker, Whitmer, Walz, what have you, they understand what it's like to respond to Donald Trump as somebody who's in an executive role, not someone who's legislating.
Pritzker pisses Trump off because he's technically got more money than him.
Negotiating with Republicans or treating our budget as contract law or as if we're doing a merger or something like that. It's somebody who knows how to lead and somebody who knows how to respond to Trump's actions, not as somebody who's going to, tweak around the edges, but using the bully pulpit to cut through the noise, because I'll shut up in just a second, Tommy, but we are in such a...
Oh, yes. We got new emotes. I also got some new icons and stuff coming up here. We're finally getting stuff over on Twitch. Full disclosure, I have a buddy that knows how to do that stuff, and he was just like, hey, man, I'll come over this weekend and we'll work on that. I'm like, yes.
Corroded media environment, and especially on the right. They're just eating up this slop on the internet. How do we break through? How do we break through? And having a simple message doesn't mean we're stupid. In fact, it means we're better at politics. And I think Democrats have to stop resting on our laurels and thinking that just because our policies are better than the Republicans, that's true. It doesn't mean it's self-evident to voters, and it doesn't mean they're dumb because they don't get it. It's also because people want a clear, coherent vision and a way to differentiate yourself from the other side. And it's not about converting those Republicans. There were so many people that stayed home and just didn't show up. Those are the folks we need to be activating. And I think they were depressed because of the foreign policy of the administration and that seeing their tax dollars going to this slaughter in Gaza, and also just the fact that
the one thing I have not seen talked about in like any news space is just how people didn't feel like they needed to get out because like the COVID thing, and like, dude, when he said the bleach, like, and during that time, enough people were just like, enough of this idiot. No, like, I really wish people would be more honest with this shit, because even we do this where we start over analyzing instead of just going like, nah, dude, like the reason a lot of people just didn't come out this time is because there wasn't motivation. It wasn't a lack of motivation because of like yes, that disenfranchised people who were already interested in politics and already like, but I'm just saying that the people who are already either apolitical or just do not pay attention to news, which is the majority of the country, they didn't feel inspired to come out because there was no pandemic to really worry about. And then on top of it, they're like, yeah, you know what? There's inflation, and let's get somebody else in there and let them try it. Again, it could have been anybody. That's my theory, is it didn't even need to be Trump. It could have been anybody else that wasn't a Democrat, because they just thought, hey, you know what? Not enough change in my monies. Which again, not looking at the fact that we just came out of a pandemic and somehow the economy did rebound like that. Like can we also kind of address the fact that like everybody had such a traumatic response to COVID. Look at the way that the anti-maskers were. Like, I have to admit this one where it's like, yeah, I kind of fell into the whole like not wanting to think about it, and that's why I think we have that joke about like, whoa, we lost 2 years. Well, in that vein, I think that we also started kind of thinking a little bit like not as serious as we should have, where it's just taking the time to go, oh, holy shit, like the accomplishments that we really did make, and not view them as such.
They didn't.
And then listening to guys like Trump and like being convinced like, oh yeah, they didn't accomplish anything. It's like, yeah, we didn't accomplish anything.
Feel like they were being offered anything transformational on the economy, so they rather just stay home and not vote for anybody. And those are the people I think we have to target.
And we had a candidate for a long time who was just self-evidently too old. But to your point about
the problem with that is if Trump actually does make the middle class richer, then you're going to lose them. And then, honestly, we're going to have a hard time winning any more elections.
Resting on his laurels. One person who was not...
Because if the middle class starts honestly joining the Republican Party, like en masse, that is something that we would have a very difficult time to come back from.
Resting on his laurels this week was Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey.
Yep.
He delivered a marathon 25-hour speech on the Senate floor. Booker broke the record for the longest floor speech in history, which had been held by a horrible racist senator named Strom Thurmond when he was trying to block civil rights legislation. Here's a clip of what Cory Booker had to say during part of this long speech.
I rise with the intention of disrupting the normal business of the United States Senate for as long as I am physically able. I just found out that the community violence intervention money that you allowed me to fight so hard to get into that bill is being clawed back by Donald Trump. You're revoking somebody's visa, make a phone call, tell them that you have 30 days to leave. But there should be due process. I've had farmers from New Jersey to Texas coming to my office about this president freezing contracts that we approved in a bipartisan manner. I am inadequate. You are inadequate. We're senators with all of this power, but in this democracy, the power of the people is greater than the people in power. This is a moral moment.
So my view on Cory Booker, on Bernie and AOC doing the town halls, Ro Khanna's town halls, all the, members of Congress and in the Senate who are filming vertical video and clearly not comfortable with it and don't want to be doing it anymore. It's like, good for you. Like, keep putting up shots. I'm proud of you guys. Like, more is more. I think the point you made earlier is the most important one, which is we worry way too much about what we say and not about whether what we say is reaching people, and breaking through is the hardest part. So we just got to keep putting shots on goal. To your point about a simple message, Mike,
I like that analogy.
Constructive criticism for Cory Booker would be, again, I'm really glad he did this, but my one note to him would be like, it was not always clear to me what he was filibustering about, like what the core simple message was or purpose of the filibuster. A lot of the messaging I saw was about the fact that he did it, which of course is cool, and I'm proud of him, and I think it's awesome. But I think we need to be like, look, the State of the Union protest was, you don't have a mandate to cut Medicare, right? Representative standing up there shaking what's his name? God, I'm forgetting his name.
Al Green.
Al Green. Jesus Christ.
Yes,
how can I forget Al Green's name? Al Green shaking his hair. You don't have a mandate to cut Medicare.
That was amazing.
Booker's was less clear. To your point earlier too, I mean, I think Democrats do worry a bit about expectations management. I know you heard that a lot early on, like, we have no power, we don't have the Senate, we don't have the House. Even the Tim Walz comments you mentioned earlier about how, voters are going to be expecting universal Medicare, like, on the part of me, like the angel on my shoulder, that makes me excited because I would love to see us move to a universal system. The anxious political operative on my shoulder thinks back to, the 2020, 2019 debates where we were all fighting about how fast we were going to implement Medicare for all, right? And like, ultimately the votes were just not there. The political will wasn't necessarily there. So I don't want to raise people's expectations and then let them down and have another generation of people feeling like, oh, the fucking Democrats, they promised so much.
I wanted to get mad at that, but then he brought it back to the point where I'm like, okay, he's got a point there.
And they don't deliver. But I guess right now in this moment, all I want to see is people fighting and doing things and like putting their hearts out there and making the case. And I think that's why I thought what Cory Booker did was good.
I agree with you. And I think, to bring it back to your comment a little bit earlier about Biden and his inability to really, he was unable to use the bully pulpit for 2 years at all.
Well, no, he literally couldn't. Physically, he couldn't.
And we're getting more reporting about
that's part of the
his
problem.
Condition and I really do think he set Kamala Harris up to fail in many ways, and I think that was a dereliction of his duty to the country. But it also was a problem in which the Democrats didn't perform democracy. So a lot of the messaging in this election was rightly, as we're seeing, that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, as he demonstrated on January 6th. Mm-hmm. Okay. But first you have to sell to the American public that democracy, as you're describing it, not just as a virtue, but in practice, is something that needs to be protected. And you may think that's self-evident, back to our point about how the Democrats feel like they should be above communicating these things. You may think that it is self-evident, but why is democracy so important to protect? And I think Cory Booker agreed with what you had to say about maybe the lack of specificity or perhaps I would love if it was, focused on those broad-based social programs a little bit more. But overall, it's a really good thing because at the very least, you are performing services to your constituents. You are performing the act of standing up to somebody who is an authoritarian and showing folks what it's like to be politically empowered. There's an old phrase, you'd rather be strong and wrong than basically weak and losing. And I really do think the Democrats could be okay with being strong and wrong and swinging for the fences and then maybe not necessarily delivering on everything. Although I think that the conditions now, given what we've talked about with oligarchy, given what we've seen with Donald Trump and how he's so carelessly wielded the executive branch for whatever the hell he wants. Like, I think a lot of Democrats are going, why can't we do that? Why can't we have a president that acts in a manner that addresses the urgency of our both, economic situation, but also when it comes to systemic racism or the Supreme Court or abortion rights? I mean, there's a lot of ways that I think Democrats can show that they are democratically responsive, because when it comes back to Biden, a primary would have done this, right? You would have you would have heard Democrats speak about and hash this stuff out. You would have heard what these different Democrats stand for, even if Kamala Harris wasn't the nominee in the end. And that would have been a performance of democracy that would have bolstered the underlying message about Trump's threat to democracy, because you would have shown that you took it seriously in practice. And I think that when I speak to people who are not really politically engaged, just kind of your everyday, person that has some family members, right? They'll say, well, the Democrats are liars too. Biden was so old, and what did they do about it? And I think that, again, when we bring it back to this information age, having a president that couldn't use the bully pulpit and who chose not to perform democracy because he wanted to hang on to power for another term was a really, really bad cocktail to give to the American public with Trump on the ballot.
Yeah, he was self-evidently too old, and there was a suggestion in 2019 in a Politico story that he would be a one-term president and viewed himself as a bridge to the next generation. I think all of us bought into that and believed it, and I think the 2022...
Why wouldn't we? I mean, the thing is, the party kind of shifted around the idea that he was only going to do the one term, and then it was almost at the last minute, it feels like, when Trump announced in what was it, the November, 2 years before the election, or was even 3. I felt like it was a 3-year campaign.
Midterms happened.
But yeah, once that happened, that's when they started just being like, oh, maybe not.
And the White House started to believe its own spin and decided that only Joe Biden could win again. And then, you're reading, I don't want to belabor these books, but there's all these Biden books coming out, and you're starting to read anecdotes about top aides in the Biden campaign talking about how disastrous the debate prep was, and how Biden had no second-term agenda and couldn't articulate what he wanted to do. And then also at the same time saying that it was wrong for him to have dropped out or to have gotten pushed out. And I'm just like, what? How can you possibly believe that? It's like it was not only Joe Biden. I mean, the sin was Joe Biden running for re-election, but then the month between the fucking debate and him dropping out just absolutely screwed Kamala Harris, foreclosed any chance of doing some sort of mini primary type thing that made her, I think she ultimately would have been the nominee no matter what, but that would have made it look like it came through a legitimate process and not this coronation via a Joe Biden statement. He just sort of screwed us throughout that whole time period.
And Kamala Harris, she's okay. She's not a victim. And I had some issues with how she ran her campaign. Obviously, I thought the elevating of Liz Cheney was insane. But I feel for her in
taking Dick Cheney's endorsement. Yeah,
where
that was
I
stupid.
think a lot of women have experienced this in their professional lives. I am not shading Sam Cedar here. I just want to be clear. But older men who often think that they know better and will talk down to you and are dismissive of you broadly, because a lot of the reporting is that she was broadly sidelined, and he elevated the fact that he wanted to appoint a black woman as his VP instead of just doing it. And I think that gave this opening for the Republicans to attack her in this racist and misogynistic way.
That's true.
And the fact that he didn't really groom her as his successor, there should be probably a bit of soul searching on the Biden side as to why they were so dismissive of somebody who has great credentials and who has been a senator, attorney general, went to Howard, smart person. Their politics were similar. Why they didn't choose to give her a leg up and elevate her as Biden's potential successor instead of just throwing her in at the 11th hour when Biden couldn't do it. And then he was calling her and saying, don't break from me at all, even though
because, I mean, that you kind of said it there. They didn't have a chance to really even decide. Trump did what he did, and then all of a sudden Biden and the rest of the party was just like, well, we beat him in 2020, and we have the incumbency. We might as well just stick with it. And then Joe is just like, huh? I'm a cucumber. What?
Obviously, my approval rating is in the gutter. So there's misogyny and racism on that side
Yeah, Jack. I love cucumbers. Cucumber salad. I also like cucumbers in water.
too, in my view.
Did you know that there's so many ways you could definitely cut a cucumber?
That hopefully Democrats begin to examine about themselves and some of the leaders in the party, frankly.
And, you know, frankly, they kind of kneecapped her publicly in the days following the debate performance by releasing that memo that crapped on a lot of people, including me.
Let's be honest. One of my favorite things that Biden would do is this.
But referred to like a bunch of
Congrats.
self-important podcasters. But you know, talked about how all the polling showed that Joe Biden was beating all of his rivals, including Kamala Harris. It's like, guys, you're shitting on your own vice president. What are you doing here? But anyway, so
Yep.
the final question for you, like the flip side of our mostly happy, mostly constructive talk is there are some corners of the internet, mostly Twitter, where it feels like 2016 never ended. It's like 2016 Groundhog Day. You see, you know, moderates pointing the finger at leftists and blaming them for election losses. You see the kind of more Red Rose DSA crew angry that liberals are punching left or suggesting that anyone who doesn't hold, you know, the kind of like the maximalist policy position
Max left.
is a sellout or a corporate stooge or whatever. How do you think we get past this? Like, can we heal these divides, or is it just the reality that intra-party fighting always feels and is the worst because it's your friends fighting with your friends?
I think it's a tough question. I do think we're in a better position, as I said earlier, than after 2016. I'm hopeful that folks deploy an intersectional analysis of why the Democrats lost, and it is very much a lack, in my view, of focus on broad-based social programs with a vision that we haven't seen like since the New Deal, or really since Medicare or Medicaid. These are the kinds of things that we're due. It's time to propose these kinds of broad social programs for people. That's a huge part of it. Mm-hmm. But I also think that COVID broke a lot of people's brains.
Yes,
we're in an extremely reactionary time period. There's a Me Too backlash where I don't know if I can remember such a anti-feminist moment. I mean, really since like the tabloids and the way that they treated women in the early 2000s, but that seems so small ball compared to the normalization of this kind of thing at the Trump administration level. I think we can heal these divides by having a shared vision of boldness going into 2028. I think a lot of the base.
That's why the Bernie and AOC rallies really were a breath of fresh air. But I'd say that my only gripe is that we're so far out from the 2028 cycle.
Is frustrating.
Where we need to ride that momentum from those rallies, but next time they need to like have some local politicians, you know, their DSA politicians or whoever they're going to run from that leftist perspective, and really get behind them.
By the lack of fight in the Democratic Party, which aligns much more with how a lot of us felt back in the
Let's be honest, those are the most effective ways of endorsing.
Day.
I have to say.
And you see this bear out in Chuck Schumer's poll numbers. They want Democrats to be fighting, and they don't want to constantly be cutting deals. They don't want to have to meet these fascists halfway, because it is the bitch slap theory of politics, and it's all Donald Trump knows. Even if you don't win the fight, you've got to show that you can fight them, because otherwise they're going to walk all over you. And I think that the base is behind that as a broad vision for how the party should move: anti-oligarchy, and also fighting, right? And we didn't have that in the wake of 2016. There was just arguing, and it was a lot of Bernie supporters saying, "Hey, we were right the whole time. These were the kinds of politics that we should pursue." But as I said earlier, you know, I guess I'm somebody that's taken some grief on the internet from even my side, because I was somebody who saw a lot of value in Elizabeth Warren's politics and antitrust and going about making people's lives better within the set of circumstances that are given to us, right? And so I can say, like, yes, I support decommodifying housing. I support a universal healthcare program. I support free college for all, and a foreign policy that is a lot more humane than what we've been seeing. But I can also understand that we have to have the requisite dexterity to respond to the far right fascist elements that we're with right now. So we can't all be perfect allies. We have to come together, and perhaps through that process of coming together and fighting Donald Trump, we will come out the other end with a more cohesive vision of how to move forward. But I do think,
yeah, I mean, agree to disagree on certain issues, and then just be like, okay, we can we can focus on this one. That's kind of how this goes.
This anti-oligarch,
but like you said, it's like COVID, and just like, I'm not gonna just say COVID broke the brains, but yeah,
stuff can't just be
thank you,
for
Mitesh. Happy White Mocha Friday.
The benefit of electoral politics.
Ooh, going
this
for
has
coffee.
to translate into the Democrats taking on campaign finance reform,
Happy White
and
Mocha
also
Friday.
pairing that with broad-based social programs that tax the rich. We have to tax the rich. We have to return to higher marginal tax rates. I'm not even saying we need to go to what it was like in the post-World War II era, where we were at our most industrious and the country was growing. I'll settle for pre-Reagan numbers, but really these billionaires are out of control. And governments, what they do, they redistribute wealth. It's just a question of how we choose to redistribute this wealth. And we are at such catastrophic levels of income and wealth inequality that, frankly, many people in our body politic are not making sane choices about who they're electing for president. So how do we make sure that we cut off some of these reactionary elements, make sure that people's basic needs are met, and we are past due for a broad-based social program like a Medicare for All or something that helps people in that manner?
Yeah, I'm with you. Like a shared vision of boldness, candidates that look like they're fighting. Barack Obama ran on, not taking PAC money and a whole bunch of efforts to clean up Washington in the wake of the Jack Abramoff scandals of 2006, which old heads might remember. I totally agree with you that economic inequality is completely out of control, and figuring out some just clear, simple formulation for how you're going to get it in line, whether it's a billionaire's tax, whether it's Elizabeth Warren, 2% of assets, whatever it might be. And then I do think, like, for the next 4 years, we just have to go.
Had a minor disagreement earlier about Second Amendment. I'm still here, though. Also, Alirda, I can see my word choice was a bit drastic. I'm sorry if I insulted you at all.
Coalition building where we're all
thank you for the apology.
Mindful of the need to build the biggest possible tent, like the coalition to end.
I used to treat myself to a white mocha every Friday when I started my first job here.
War in Gaza in the Trump era has to include like the isolationist Rand Paul Republican types, and then the far left, and those of us.
That was Ruben over on YouTube.
To care about.
Sorry, you guys can't see it. We just got Twitch chat today. I don't know. I'm gonna have to do some futzing around on this thing.
People in Gaza can't be, purists. We can't say that you have to say the word genocide to be a part of this coalition. You can't say you have to believe exactly what I
do hate. I hate to agree with him, but he's right about this.
Because that's just bad politics, right? The lesson from
that's
around the world.
hard for me, but yeah, I'm trying.
I know.
Look, I mean, you mentioned Obama. I was 14, right? And into 2008, that was what Obama's candidacy is why I cared about politics. It's literally what got me interested. And it was truly his opposition to the Iraq War. And I think that sometimes there's this consensus in Washington that there are people that don't vote on foreign policy. And I don't think that's true anymore, especially when you can see children whose brains are falling out of their head and their fathers wailing over their carcass on your phone. Like, this had an effect of really muddying the waters of the morality of the two political parties that can get elected in this bipartisan system. And I think that the Democrats really are doing a disservice if they don't reckon with how they damage their brand with young people by supporting this.
Look, no, I'm not arguing that. I've been opposed to this war from the very beginning. I'm talking about like the way we talk about issues, the way we decide who can be part of a coalition or a movement, and just making sure it's as broad as possible, because authoritarian movements everywhere, they do well when the opposition, the left usually, is divided. That's how they succeed.
That's why I was saying psyops with a lot of this shit. I'm not even kidding.
Because they rarely get 50% of the vote. They're like winning with pluralities at like 43, 44%, sort of Trumpian numbers. And I think it's just a good lesson to learn. But We covered a lot of ground, Emma. Thank you so much for doing the show today. It was great talking with you. I really appreciate it and hope to do it again soon.
I would love that. Thanks so much for having me, Tommy, and I really appreciate all the work you're doing. You're a bright spot in this insane media environment. So thanks so much.
True. Thank you. Okay.
If you guys enjoyed this content, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out in the algorithm. And also, check out my live streams weekdays from Monday through Friday and special Saturday streams. I really appreciate you guys checking out the content, and I'll see you in the next one.